Hey, so I'm doing a quick video to show the difference between EPP and the tracing method when it comes to quilting hand sewn quilts. So this piece here has been done with EPP, or English paper piecing, and that's where you have cardstock paper pieces cut into very specific size shapes that match and go together with other shapes, and these patterns are created, and you baste fabric around the paper, and then once the fabric is basted around the paper, you can sew those pieces together. I make a lot of hexie quilts, and these are the size hexies that I use. They're 1/2 inch from point to point, from here to here. It doesn't go across, and they come full paper templates, and I punch a hole in them. That's my hole there. That's why it's off center, not perfect. But then what you would do is take a piece of fabric, and wrap it around and baste it with some thread. And then when you were done stitching all your pieces together, you could take these paper pieces out before you actually quilt the quilt. But this takes a lot of time, especially when you have such unique shapes and they don't go together very well. Hexies are a little easier to sew together for me. But for something like this, I tried this same exact pattern using the tracing method. And so I just wanted to show that as well, because there is a difference, and you can do either. And this one, I would recommend you have a high skills set when it comes to hand sewing, so you know which points you're going for and what Y seams are. But for this one, you would take those same paper templates and use them as tracing templates on the back side of fabric. So you can see, maybe if I hold this up close, you can see a pencil line where I traced the fabric and then used that as my stitch line. And also I used that as my cut line to cut a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I would mark this line first and then use a 1/4 inch seam ruler to cut this seam allowance. And then when you sew them together at the points, they don't lay flat. So that is one thing that EPP is better at. But you do Y seams, so you don't sew all the way out to the point. You just sew to the stitch point where the stitch point meets. And so it's very important that these points of all the pieces, and some pieces there's like 5 or 6 of them that meet up, you want that point to be very accurate. And when you are tracing this by hand, and also sewing it by hand, it becomes really hard to keep that accurate. And then the piece in the end just doesn't lay as flat. So there are some pros and cons to this method versus EPP. I tend to think that EPP is a better method for accuracy's sake. And also you can leave the papers in until the very end, and that just helps leave it nice and crisp. And then also when you take the papers out, all this lays flat because you've sewn it flat. Yeah, so that's the difference between EPP and the tracing method.